So, Dead Island 2 has now been out for just about over a week, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about my experiences with Dead Island 2 so far, going over, loads of different categories about the game, talking about loads of different, points that we can talk about, and generally, my experience about the game, so, basically about me playing Dead Island 2, so you don't have to, effectively. Now, I'm not saying this game is bad, that definitely, this game definitely isn't a bad game at all, but basically, if you haven't played the game yet, then you've come to the right place. I'm just going to be talking about my experience so far, from a PlayStation 5 point of view as well, but I'm sure this will be pretty similar across all platforms. Haven't really seen any issues in terms of optimization on PC either, but yeah, we're just going to be talking about Dead Island 2, whilst also playing Dead Island 2, and I think a good point to start with is just talking about the general setting. Now, obviously, it's set within Los Angeles, set after the story of Dead Island 1, and I think it works well, to be honest. I think the setting is nice. I think the mix of zombies within this setting works really well, and yeah, I haven't really got any issues there. Obviously, this does sort of bring us on to the open worlds and the fact that, for me, I really enjoy open world games. I think that's definitely my favourite sort of genre of game, and it's quite disappointing that, in Dead Island 2, the game isn't a massive open world game, but at the end of the day, that's not what the game was intended to be, so I can't really have any issues with that, where at the end of the day, that's not the type of game they were going for. It's not really I wouldn't say it's a flaw in the game, really, since, yeah, that's not what they were going for, and that's not the idea of the game, so you can't expect that. That's not, yeah, you can't really be going into Dead Island 2 expecting a massive open world game with loads and loads of different small areas to explore and everything like that. There are places to explore, there's definitely a fair few things to explore, but it's not massive. There's not a massive open world. It doesn't work like that, and yeah, so you can't, don't expect that going into the game. I probably had my expectations a little bit too high in terms of open worlds, and I was a little bit disappointed. So obviously, you want to make sure that you don't have that issue, and that you definitely keep your expectations in check, that this isn't a massive open world game, and it is a more linear story, and that's how the game works. So that's definitely something worth noting. If you are looking for a massive open world game like those AAA games, you're not going to get that with Dead Island 2. It's a more compact game in terms of where you can explore. You can go into different areas. You do unlock fast travel later in the game, and you can go into different areas, fast travel to certain areas, and see certain things, go back to old locations, but generally speaking, you can't just, you can freely explore older locations, but it's not a massive open world. There's certain districts, you can go to certain districts and look around them and stuff like that, but there's not going to be much to do unless you are following, the main missions within the game. Which does bring us on to the next point, really, which is going to talk about the story. So the story, overall, in my opinion, is very good, but I think that, obviously, the story probably isn't the main focus. No, probably not. I don't think the story is the main focus with Dead Island 2, which is fair enough. Obviously, the main focus, really, is the idea of zombies and being able to, engage in the combat like we're doing right now. That sort of thing is definitely the main idea behind Dead Island 2, and that's always been the main idea behind the Dead Island games, is of course the zombies and the overall combat. But I do think that the story is there for those that want the story, and that's definitely, if you're looking for a game with a decent story, then you will get that with Dead Island 2. The story is there. If you want to be able to focus in on that, then that's something you can definitely do with the game. So I don't really have any issues with that. Yeah, like I said, that definitely wasn't the main idea behind the game, but yeah, it really is there for those that want it, and the story missions are there. The story is a decent length as well. I believe it's about 20 hours, I believe, probably maybe a little bit shorter for some people, a little bit longer depending on how you want to play the game, of course, but generally speaking, yeah, the story's there, and it's decent length. It's definitely not too short, and it's definitely not too long either, so it will do the job, and it's basically, that's just how the gameplay sort of ties together and everything like that, and I think it works nicely. I do think the story is decent, and so yeah, that does sort of bring us on to the overall gameplay of the game, and I do think that lengthwise, with side quests and collectibles and everything like that, getting certain abilities, that works well. I do think that the overall idea of the abilities and everything is pretty cool, but I'll get onto that in a minute. But yeah, I think the general gameplay with the side quests and the main quests links well together. I think that works really well, and the side quests are definitely there. There's not loads and loads of side quests, but they're there, and they do work for those that want to be able to play them. Now, personally, I haven't done all of the side quests in the game yet, but from the ones I have done, they're pretty basic. They are fairly similar to story missions in some aspects, just not quite as long, and obviously not quite as detailed, but yeah, the side missions, which is really nice to see. It's not just all about the main story. So now let's talk about those skills and abilities abilities within the game. So obviously you get access to certain skills, and certain skills are tied to certain characters. Right now I'm seeing gameplay of Jacob, and I've done a video going over the characters that you should be playing as. I'll link that video at the end of this video and in the description. But overall, we'll talk about characters soon. But the skills, I think they're cool. I think they work well. I don't like the idea of dodging and blocking being separate. I think that that's generally something you should be able to do both of. But of course, you know, it does switch things up a bit. It allows you to change up the gameplay, have multiple playthroughs and everything like that, which at the end of the day is always cool. It allows for replayability, which is always going to be something you want from a game. If there's no replayability, then, you know, is it really worth it in the end of the day for those that want to be able to get every single penny out of a game? Since Dead Island 2 isn't cheap, it's cheaper than some of the bigger games we get these days, but it isn't a cheap game, of course. So being able to have that replayability is definitely a great idea, and does work well with Dead Island 2. Having 6 different characters and loads of different abilities that you can use definitely works well, and I can see that, you know, really being a plus side to Dead Island 2. I can't see that at all being a negative, and yeah, so I haven't really got any complaints in terms of replayability and the abilities and everything like that. The abilities are very unique, and they're, you know, they're unique to all of the different characters as well, which I suppose we can talk about now. So there are 6 different playable characters within Dead Island 2, and yeah, like I was mentioning, they all have their pros and cons. That, for example, Jacob is a pretty well-rounded character. He's a character that has quite a lot of health, but then again, he's not the strongest of characters. And then of course there are characters that are really strong and they can take a lot of damage, but then they can't deal a lot of damage, and they aren't very agile and things like that. You know, they all have pros and cons, and there are certain characters that are better for certain people depending on how they play the game, which I really like. And I think that also, yeah, is a great plus side of the game. Being able to have 6 different protagonists really effectively allows for 6 different playthroughs of the game as well, since right at the start of the game you pick the character that you do, of course, want to play as. So being able to pick that and then, yeah, have 6 different playthroughs works really well, and it's definitely a plus side. Once again, talking about that replayability of the game. So yeah, the characters works well, I have no issues there, and it, you know, changes up the story a bit too. So yeah, no problems there. And I think obviously it's a bit different in terms of Dead Island 1 as well. That switches things up. I think the crossover from Dead Island 1 to Dead Island 2 is very clean, and I don't have any issues about that at all. So let's actually talk about weapons within the game and combat, which is arguably one of the biggest parts within Dead Island 2. Now, there are loads and loads and loads of weapons that you can use within the game, which I really do like. I think that that's a real plus side of the game, and one of the main talking points about the game really is, of course, the combat that you can get stuck into. And I don't really have any issues in terms of the combat. I think it works fairly well. My main grudge with the combat and weapons is the weapon durability. That weapons lose their durability so quickly, in my opinion, especially earlier in the game. I found when I was, you know, on my first part of the playthrough, I found that weapons just lost their durability really quickly, and that was quite disappointing, and it was pretty tedious just having to switch to weapons all the time. I found that, yeah, very annoying. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's just something that you have to get used to, and it is something that you can get used to. You do just have to get used to repairing weapons frequently, and also just get used to being able to not just repair them frequently, but use lots of different types of weapons as well. So providing you're okay with that, if you haven't played other games where there's weapon degradation systems, then you shouldn't really have any issues. I've just found it to be more of an issue in this game compared to some of the other games that I played with systems like that. But either way, you know, it is there, and it's something you'll have to put up with, but it is definitely, you know, something you can deal with. But overall, I think the combat is really good. I think the interactions with zombies, we'll talk about zombies in a minute, but I think overall combat works well. I haven't really got any complaints there. The interactions are really unique, and it allows for lots of detail, lots of gore within the combat, and yeah, that's really, to be honest, exactly what you want from a game like this. So no complaints there in terms of combat. It works well and is always playing a part within missions. There's loads of different ways you can approach combat as well, of course, and yeah, no complaints. So you can, you know, depending on the character you choose, depends on the way you approach combat, to be honest, but yeah, no complaints there. And like I said earlier, the weapons are great as well. Lots of variety in terms of weapons you can use. Obviously, the main focus is the melee weapons. Melee weapons are definitely the main focus. They're the best weapons within Dead Island 2, but firearms are also there for those that want to be able to use those. So now to wrap things up, let's talk about the zombies. So there are loads of different types of zombies. I mean, on screen now you're seeing a load of walkers here, and they're the sort of standard types of zombies, but you can get loads of different types of zombies to play as, or well, not play as, but to counter within Dead Island 2, and all of them require different weapons to use. Some of them, you know, they all have their pros and cons, they all got their strengths and weaknesses, which is really cool. So it allows for lots of variety in combat, which really keeps things fresh and clean. But there we go, that does just about wrap up things here. That was, you know, me talking about basically a Dead Island 2 critique, going over my experiences so far with the game and how I found it. Overall, very positive. I think it's a great game and definitely works well in terms of combat. That's definitely the main strengths. One of the, you know, weaknesses in my opinion is probably when it comes to the open world not being quite, you know, that impressive, and then also the weapon durability I find to be quite annoying as well. But either way, that does just about wrap up things here. Now on screen now, you are seeing a link to the video where I go over the 6 protagonists within the game and the one that you should be playing as. So if you're interested in watching that, then just hit the link on the screen now.